Good afternoon. Hi. My name is Carolyn. I'm with the Academy of Science. We're very pleased to be partners with the St. Louis Zoo to bring you conservation conversations generously underwritten by Cooper Rasmussen. Many of you are Academy members and friends. For those of you who are not familiar with the Academy, I'd like to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are. The Academy is an independent science organization supported entirely through community contributions. We have been connecting science and the community since 1856 and have a long-standing mission to advance the public understanding of science and inspire the next generation of scientists and science advocates. We offer a broad range of free and low-cost public science programming, collaborative science seminars and trips, and tours highlighting science at venues across the region. You can find out more information on the Academy and our community-wide events by visiting the website academyofsciencestl.org. If you'd like to receive e-notification of upcoming Academy and St. Louis Zoo public lectures and events, there's an e-news sign-up sheet going around the room. If you are a student who needs to verify your attendance, please come see me after the talk. I do want to mention an event that's coming up soon. We also partner with the zoo on our science seminar series. In 2 weeks, 3 fellows from the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development program with Novus International will be talking about their work to alleviate poverty and increase food security. The talk is free and open to the public. You do not need to register to attend. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jack from the zoo.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today, especially our group here from Breeze, Illinois, Central High School. Yay! Yeah, the first thing I was concerned about when I saw these gang colors coming in and them splitting up around the auditorium is what's going on. But they all came over to see Greg, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Greg Rasmussen. Greg is probably the premier wild dog researcher. Now I'm going to embarrass him a little bit and really crank this up for him. Been studying wild dogs for more than 24 years. For the last 10 plus years, he's been the founder and the director of the Painted Dog Conservation Project in Zimbabwe. Greg has learned more about wild dogs and advanced their technology and our understanding of them in the last decade or a quarter of a century than is going, and he's developed a lot of good programs, including taking snares that they have found for both wild dogs and antelope and creating them into gifts and souvenirs that are being sold right here at the St. Louis Zoo gift shop. So at this point, I'd like to introduce to you Greg Rasmussen and let Greg take it over from here.
Well, thank you, Jack, for that. And it's a great pleasure to be invited here to St. Louis Zoo. It was a very impromptu presentation in that I was at WCN only last week, and they said, please, would you come and do a lecture? I said, have you got time? And I was kindly told, we've always got time. So it made time for me to come here today and share with you conservation of an animal, the painted dog, that's very close to my heart. Obviously, after 25 years, what else could it be? I still get excited by the fact that when I still see them in the wild, I still get the same buzz as when I first did, so I kind of realize I'm in the right job. And so I'm going to share with you the birth of a conservation project, how I got into this, a little bit about what the dogs themselves, of course, problems they're facing, and the one thing about the painted dog is people don't realize it's not a domestic dog gone wild. It's a true species in its own right. It split off about 12 million years ago. I mean, they've got those big ears, which are actually for cooling. In fact, I'm kind of, as a scientist, I have my students do ridiculous projects as why do dogs have big ears? That's the title of their thesis. And that's actually when they're running, they keep their ears forward to cool their brain. They've got different dentition. They're unique in every way. But the one thing is also in sound. People think, is this a dog? Does it bark? Well, people don't realize that these guys have got a vocal repertoire that's the same as a dolphin. So to give you that kind of idea, I'm going to share with you, though, one of the most haunting calls of the painted dog, which is the call they use when they're in distress. And it's a two-way call. It can be used either, I'm in distress because I've lost one of my pack members, or I'm in distress because I'm lost. And we're still trying to unravel why. So I'm going to share with you. This is a dog. We haven't got. It's not really very loud. I'm going to have to do it for you. It's. That's what it sounds like. And they bounce that noise about 2 kilometers, a mile or more. It can be heard. But they use high frequency and low frequency. And I'm going to share with you, and I was saying, well, if one's lost, so why would a species have a call when it's like, surely a distress call? Why is it so important? The painted dog is one of the most social animals around. In fact, their social system puts ours to shame. And I was going to share with you a little clip. I don't know if the sound's going to come up any, but I'm going to share with you a little clip of when we separate a pack member. We take a pack member because we want to put a radio collar on it, or sometimes we just got to fix it up, if an animal's injured or snared, and we put it back to the pack. And actually, when we dart a dog, the pack waits around. I can have dogs almost all over there, and I'm having all my staff saying, be quiet, don't make a noise, don't disturb the dogs. We don't want them to feel threatening. And here's a little clip. Here's a pack, a male's just been put back. He's just had his anesthesia in his collar. And this is the greeting he gets. Not quite sure that's how we'd all love to be woken up when we come from anesthesia, but, this is kind of dogs. But when I started to work with dogs, I realized there was another side of dogs that nobody knew. And this is one of the great things about field studies, is that you learn things about a species that can help you to tell people about what they are, but also can share with you, more about the species. So here's a slide of a dog, and you can see he's got an injury on his neck. And you say, well, so what's that told you? Well, actually, what it was that it was the first dog I'd ever seen in the wild that was injured. And often some of these things are almost like the birth of a conservation project. Here's this dog. His name was Ulna. And he'd been following a pack. I used to live with packs for about up to 28 days a month. And I heard this altercation, and I rush in, and there's Ulna and his brother Circus and the whole pack, and they're defending their pups against a lion. Well, Ulna got grabbed by the lion, and he was mauled. And when because when the dogs have got pups come first, and they'll defend them to the hilt. They'll put themselves on the line for pups. And Ulna was lying on the ground at the end of this, and he couldn't even lift his head. He couldn't move. And I'm like, help, what do I do? I go and find a vet. Well, finding a vet in Africa is not quite the same as just, oh, hello, can you just come and have a look at my dog? Yeah, just bring him into the surgery. This is like a 9-hour job to get a vet in. So finally, I get a vet, I organize transport, this, that, and the other. And the vet just takes one look and goes, well, why did you bother calling me? It's like, well, he's going to die. He can't even lift his head. And he walks away. And it left me with a lot of conservation and ethical questions. For example, well, he's suffering. Is there something we can do? If it was your own domestic dog, you do something about it. And, it's nature. And then, of course, well, what is nature? We're in charge of nature. We've interfered so much, even in our big national parks. And I left with a rather kind of unhappy feeling. And then I noticed that the pack was doing different things. And they were and suddenly I found out that what the pack was doing, the next day I came back, he was gone. He's dead, I'm thinking. The pack had dragged him away, and they were feeding him, licking his wounds. That picture there is 3 months after the injury. So it gives you an idea of how bad it was on day one. 6 months later, there's Ulna, ready to fight another day. And that's exactly what he did in a number of cases. And so, yes, dogs and lions and hyenas, predators have their battles in the wild. But, all in all, they've all got on reasonably well together. And as I say, you know, the dogs are so cooperative that they work well as a team. I'm just going to share with you a fun a video clip, though, of the power of an incredibly organized. The one thing about painted dogs is that they're probably one of the most organized societies, and they're very good at making changes. You know, suddenly an alpha male gets injured, the beta male, the second in charge, takes over until the alpha male's good again and then says, here's your job back. Now, how many societies does that happen in? Normally it's like, oh, good, the boss is down. I'm now sitting in the boss's chair, and when it's time to get out, I don't want to get out. So here's a pack of dogs minding their own business. They've got pups in the bushes, but they've also got some hyenas that are trying to snag a pup or two. And the dogs are almost in there, but just doing nothing, theoretically. And the hyenas are trying to work out how to snag a pup. And the dogs are almost like on a ready, steady, go. And you could almost detect what was going on there, you know, with this pack of dogs. They were almost lying there, and they were almost going, you take the one on the right, you take the one on the left, you know. And this is what's something so special about them. And of course, they're good at that when they're hunting. This is a little quick hunting scene. You know, they try to stay in the thickets. They try to stay in thick bush. They stay hidden. You see them coming up the side there. People always think that they just run animals down. That's nonsense. You know, they can run, but they still want to get close before they start the chase. Otherwise, all the value of the food's gone and burns up in energy. They're the most efficient predator. It's not the best footage. I'm not going to win any awards. They don't, by the way, chase giraffe, but... But interestingly, they're very... here goes the chase. We never see the kill. It's too quick. It's literally 10 seconds, 5 seconds. They're so efficient because they work as a team. There's no... lions may actually make me laugh because they really are they're really quite pathetic when it comes to catching something because they're disorganized. But, you know, the thing is here we've got a predator that's amazing. It's facing extinction. Painted dogs have suffered exactly the same as the wolf has throughout its range. You know, they've been persecuted, slaughtered. This was happening, I mean, for example, in what was now Zimbabwe, you know, 3,000 dogs were shot in a 5-year period. Well, that's actually more dogs were shot than probably conservatively occur on the whole continent. We may have 5,000 dogs left in Africa, but that's about it. And in fact, recently I've declared dogs extinct in Cameroon because I've been doing in West Africa. Bounties were being paid, they were being slaughtered under any reason, any justification, and that's actually where the name wild dog came from. It was deliberately given them as a slur. You know, it's a bit like just give somebody a bad name, say he's a thief, he's a liar, he's a this, and then there's a great excuse to then, you know, cull him and cudgel him. In Namibia, they also gave permits to shoot dogs and bushmen on the same license. So not surprisingly, this is what's left. And just for those of you whose geography is not much better than mine, this is Africa. And basically, I work in Zimbabwe here, and mainly on these two major populations up here and slightly on this one down here. And we're looking at, but you can see Zimbabwe is quite an important stronghold for the species. So I started 4.5 years ago from quite humble beginnings. I had a tracker that couldn't track, and I had a car that didn't work very well. And I started to get to grips with what were the real problems. You know, and it turned out it was man, are we surprised? It was snares, it was cars running dogs over, it was poachers, and then of course I had the redneck ranchers shooting them. I've got a pair of scapulars in my hand there with a bullet hole in it. So that was the kind of work that I was doing. Okay, the dogs were being caught in snares, wire snares, which I'll talk a bit more about. But actually the snares were not set for the dogs. They were set for bushmeat. But of course, and then of course we had the other thing was that people said, oh, but we're killing them. They might kill people. They're dangerous. This looks like a really dangerous dog to me on the golf course. This is painted dogs. There is no record of them ever attacking human beings. And in fact, I was probably one of the first people to really flesh that out, because before I worked with dogs, I worked with snakes. And so when I said to my mother, oh, I'm leaving work with poisonous snakes, she's like, oh, thank God for that. What are you going to work with? I said, wild dogs. So she goes to the library and she finds a book, and it was called Wild Dogs Running, and it's talking about, the dogs chasing riders on horses and taking the horse down and taking the rider with it. All fiction. The same kind of stuff that's said about wolves. And my mother's thinking, Jesus, is this true? And now, I think I'd rather than go back to work with black mambas, thank you very much. And I was working, as I said, I used to sleep with packs of dogs. And I'd sleep as close as I possibly could, 100 meters, 200 meters away in the bush. And at night. And in the morning, the radio collar has an activity sensor that goes from when they're sleeping, it's slow and fast when they move. So as soon as they move, I'm like, oh, good, I'm going to get out of bed. And I'm damned if I'm getting out of bed at 4:30 in the morning if they're going to have a lie-in. And I'd listen with this sensor like my baby alarm, listening by my ear. And suddenly, signal changes, and I'm like, oh, so I rush off. And first thing in the morning, I want to go to the toilet in the bush. And I got to the point where I got my trousers down by my ankles, and the whole pack of dogs appears. I've got 11 dogs. They've circled me, and they're looking at me, and I'm thinking, wild dogs running. Ooh, mother, now you're going to find out. Because there's no escape route, really. You can't bunny hop away. And they came closer and closer and closer, and they were literally like not quite touching distance, but just like 2 yards away, and they circled me, and I can't see what's going on behind me, and I think the smell drove them away in the end, And then I realized, this was just nonsense. It was the usual rubbish we talk about, and I do actually get fed up with Hollywood, sometimes with some of the way they portray animals, They don't portray, the dog that looks after it's sick and it's weak, the pack that looks after it's sick. They just want to. So basically, we knew it was a human problem. And, well, I knew at that stage. At that stage, I didn't have a team. As I say, it was me, my broken down car, and a tracker that didn't know how to track. The only thing that's changed is that he now can track. My car still gives me nightmares. But so it was things, problems that were facing everywhere. Roads, cars. So we went on a public relations campaign, road signs. And it was amazing, how we managed to bring down the mortality. Even the road signs themselves were an awareness thing. The interesting thing was, you see, we had to have, we had crossing place on that road sign, and we asked for slow down, and the ministry wouldn't let us have it. Bureaucracy is the same in Africa as it anywhere else. I said, why can't we have, we have a standard sign that says crossing place, and you stick your animal in it. I'm like, well, these are wild animals. Yes, we know, but we have cattle crossing place. You must have dog crossing place. So in the end, I said, you know what, if it's got a dog on it, I don't really care. But what I actually found out was that the dogs got killed at the same spots, as you would expect. They're like, you get humans, you get hot spots, and okay, they're not necessarily the crossing places, but they are places where they get smacked a lot. And that had a great impact, and in fact, interestingly, that young lad there, about some years later, suddenly this guy comes up to me, and he's wearing our painted dog conservation logo, and he's got his anti-poaching unit, got clothes on from us, and he's saying, remember me? He said, I was in that sign. He said, and that's what inspired me to come and join your organization. But that was just a small thing. In those days, I was also doing, in the very early crisis management, dog gets injured. Well, bearing in mind the first story about the dog that the vet said he's going to do nothing, I kind of made my point. I'm not dealing with vets, will do what I tell them now. If I want them to help me, they will help me, and that's that. And sorry about that. And we help animals in the wild. Any individual in the wild that is compromised, they're endangered, we'll at least put a sticky plaster on them. We'll give them an antibiotic. Sometimes it's a bit more than an antibiotic that's needed. But then we have responses. That's a snare injury. Dog lived, by the way. I then come up with, conservation's got to be creative. came up with collars. They look a bit butch. This is metal plate here with studs sticking out. You know, I'm not trying to make a statement. What it is the wire gets caught in those studs. And the dogs have got an 80% chance of living if they get caught. Hey, it's a big change. That's a collar on a dog that had been through a snare and survived. I don't care. The collar's a write-off. Who cares? What's $400 when you compare it to the life of an animal? But this all came out to the fact that led on to development of things like, I always dreamed I wanted a rehab unit. So that when we had dogs like that, we didn't have to just stick a sticky plaster on them and kick them out in the wild. And this is where collaborations come in, because when I had a rehab unit, well, what do I know about building a rehab unit? I'm not an animal husbandry. That's not my field. In fact, when I was a zookeeper for a short space of time, and a number of my charges escaped. So I realized that maybe I had marabou storks flying around the English countryside, so maybe I wasn't really the perfect person to keep a captive population. And do what you're good at. I think I was better at keeping them in the wild. You know, but again, I engaged someone with zoo experience, a guy called John Lemon in Australia. Come out, help us, you know, show us, share with us, and train our staff, and he helped build our facility, and you know, get all the slide gates right so we could manage the dogs in the most non-invasive. And this is, you know, this is where partnerships, you know, almost we can learn a lot from the dogs about teamwork and partnerships. You know, we like to hope in the field that we can help in situ conservation, and we hope that in situ conservation can help ex situ conservation. And we do constantly need that bridge to be built, and also our staff. You know, we're developing relationships where we do have people come and visit with skills, and they share with our staff knowledge. And this is just, again, our rehab facility. We actually have everything at our rehab facility. In fact, some of the keepers come and they say, wow, if we could, you know, okay, we've got the luxury of 70 acres for the dog enclosure. You know, we've got another 4 enclosures and slide gates everywhere we want a slide gate. We have an introduction area where when we're joining boys to girls, we're introducing them, we've got a whole facility for making up packs where we put the girl in the middle. Because incidentally, in painted dogs, the females choose. That's probably not surprising, really. But interestingly, the females, and this is where they're so different from all other species. They're not like, the alpha male of a painted dog is not like an alpha chimp or a dominant wolf. He leads that pack. He's a leader. She's the leader. She's chosen by her sisters as you are our leader, because only one female breeds. And the males have also got their chosen, like, this is our champion. And their champion is not always, quite often not the biggest, the strongest. He's the brightest. He's the smartest, and that's what she chooses for. I've had alpha males with 3 legs that the farmer shot a leg off one. But it was shot off before she chose him, so it wasn't like, oh, I'm stuck with you now and you've only got 3 legs, you know. But, you know, they choose the brightest because that's what helps them to lead a pack. But I've always known that, you know, with so few left in the wild, you know, one can say you're always sort of running out of time. And it's important, these partnerships are forged very quickly. So I'm now going to share with you, I'm going to switch a bit, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about the conservation program itself, the work we're doing with communities, and how it all ties in with the dogs. Well, the one thing I realized, you know, that we had to do something. And it wasn't good just researching dogs, finding out about dogs. You know, we had to go in the right direction. And we had to do it fast. So we have about 53 staff. And for example, because snaring is such an issue, you know, we have 18 men employed, 18, 21, it varies, collecting thousands and thousands of snares. And they're just out there 24/7, all the time. And it's just a cost that you have to say, it's a conservation cost that has to be borne. You know, you can't, you know, one of the problems with conservation is that it's not a product where you're actually going, I can say, well, if you I'll give you this if you give me that amount of money. It's something that we have to sell. So that's what I call is building for today, fighting for today. But then there's, of course, the very important, which is fighting for tomorrow. And we have a kids' bush camp where we have 1,000 kids a year come, and they come and stay. And again, we've learned an awful lot of lessons with this. In the early days, I used to try and be like the music man, you know, I was trying to help with anti-poaching, and I was doing this, and I was doing research, and I was going around as a sole educator, working in schools, doing single-day presentations. But what I wasn't leaving behind was empathy. And I realized, you know, I was lucky as a kid. I got taken under the wing of a museum curator who let me go out with him in the bush. And I didn't realize then how lucky I was, but I obviously appreciated it. But then it was always my dream to pay back. It was payback time, and I wanted kids to be able to, we have our own camp. So we have a conservation camp where 1,000 children a year come and they stay for a week. And in that week, absolutely everything is done. It's done through theater. We have 50 kids come at a time. They're split up into 5 packs of kids because, of course, and each pack's got a pack leader, which is a trained safari guide. So that, you know, and we took safari guides because at least they knew about wildlife. We had this dilemma. Did we take teachers and try to turn them into wildlife conservationists? Or did we take guys who at least knew about the bush and teach them to work with kids? So all our guides have to go on special child training courses, how to work with kids. And so you can see there now he's being child-centric. He's doing his bit there with the kids and his showing the big ears. And then we also, in that same facility, we have an education officer who is a teacher. So we have the balance of the two so that we can work it. These kids come out, and it's the first time they've ever even been in the bush. And it's all done through games, of course. One of the classic, we have a predator-prey game that seems to just go on forever. They love it. And the other one the kids love is being researcher. And so a pack of kids gets a radio collar fitted on them, but a live radio collar. And, you know, this isn't toy. This is the real deal. And then they have the pack that's got the collar has to go and hide, and the other pack has to go and find them. And then I realized that children in Africa are the same as children all over the world. 9 times out of 10, they all go and hide in the toilet. And here's the toilet. And the particular thing, why these boys are really laughing so much is the girls' toilet. So it was even better, you know, it was like the ultimate. But this is it's a great experience for kids. But one of the things that we learned, you know, and I mean, I've lived in Africa for so many years, and you start to think you know. And then you realize, actually, when you go through these programs, you don't. Let me tell you, here's a picture here. And what's the message in this picture here was that here are children that live right next door to the national park. And before we started all of this education and stuff, if I gave these children a piece of paper and said, draw me a giraffe, they'd hand you back the paper blank. Not because they couldn't draw, because they had no mental image of what a giraffe might look like. Well, you know, if conservation is at that level, you're never going to get anywhere. So, you know, that's the whole thing. These kids come out for the first time, they're introduced to wildlife at the best age, you know, 10 to 12, and they come out, we also have parents come, not all the parents, one parent come, one male, one female come as observer, one teacher, one male, one female. And the kids learn an appreciation, they learn about empathy, and a lot of the empathy is done through theater. You know, it's all done in a way, and we actually have a play where the kids are a pack of dogs that's struggling, one snared and dies, and then, oh my God, there's no food coming in. And actually, in the second scene of the play, there's a family with the same kind of problem because their father dies of AIDS. And, you know, you bring up these realities to the kids. And it makes a huge difference, and it leaves an impact. This is just a little clip of the kids. We they come and see the dogs for the first time. I say the sound's not here. but the safari guides make this, it's one of the most amazing experiences. And they develop an empathy that stays with them. And when they leave the bush camp, we've had so many cases where the kids have been very active in helping wildlife, and in their own creative way. If they do, they go back home. That going into the forest is an interesting place now. We want to go and find out, well, we only learned about a few trees, and there's a lot more trees out there to learn about. And they also have, we recently brought in a bat specialist from Houston who did part of our kids' program. I love bringing in specialists because there's then never a question that can be asked that can't be answered, and I think it's really important. And she came back about the importance of bat conservation and how, of course, people cut down dead trees thinking they're doing nothing. And the kids go back, and what did they do? They identified, the Conservation Club, which trees bats were using, and an African solution, they'd put white stones all the way around them, and basically these trees were bat trees now, and no one was allowed to touch. The community buys into it. They had to. You know, the kids are a pretty powerful force, but they are really important. And so then, yeah, yes, and again, it's providing employment, providing participation. So we're taking the snares, we turn them into art. We also, interesting, here's one of the things. Now, you'll see there's children here. No, this isn't our little slave labor department. What it actually is we had at one point, the police came to us and they said, can the children work in the Art and Crafts Center? We said, no, they can't help. No, we can't have that. And they said, no, we're almost insisting that you do. We said, why? They said, because these kids are bored, they've got nothing to do, they'd love to participate, and we would like them to participate, because then they don't get up to mischief. What mischief they were up to was none of my business. But anyway, but also it provides employment, this snare art. This program alone provides employment for 100 artisans, 100 people connected or artisans. And you have to remember, in Africa, the way it works is that one guy there is supporting 10 or 20 people. Not because he's got 10 kids, but the way it works in Africa is that he will support his brothers. If he's got a job, he'll support his brothers, he'll support his parents, and he'll support his brother's children and sister's children. It's the way it works. So one person wage earner. That's why always, people talk about Africa and nepotism and say, oh, but they're always just getting a job for their brother. Well, hey, if I had to pay for everyone, I'd say, brother, I'm going to get you a job because I've got to spread the load here somehow. But this snare art also, though, helps contribute towards some of the funding, and but it provides a lot of employment. This snare art actually gets into many great halls. That's Christie's in London, where some of our choice pieces are auctioned off to raise funds. That was shortly after my plane crash, and as I was coming back, somebody managed to turn me into a werewolf. We have an interpretive hall that we built again with help and donations. This interpretive hall basically was built by the local community. We helped them build it. We trained builders. So it's not just, oh, here, give us the money, we'll build a building. You leave skills behind, because ultimately that's what I see as very important as a conservation program. We have an interpretive hall. Those walls, incidentally, are all made of snare wires. We basically take all the wires, we make a mesh of them, and we use it as reinforced concrete. There's not a brick in that wall, and you can see there's an elephant up there. The wall is as tall as an elephant. And also, in fact, ties in with the kids' bush camp, because we actually had the parents saying, can we have a bush camp? And we said, no, you can't have a bush camp. Yes, but please, we want to come to the bush camp. So now, one day when the kids are there, we bus all the parents of those kids in to see what their kids are doing. And part of this is, well, we can justify that, because you parents are now going to go through Interpretive Center, you get a tour, you get to see about what your kids are doing, you get to learn about conservation. At least then you can answer maybe half of your kids' questions. So ultimately, you look at what's happened heading for a bright future. Well, let me give you some idea of a little Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to measure things in numbers. Dogs, that's my ultimate goal, is dogs and their habitat. Well, when I started in '89, there was 300 to 350 dogs. And as the years have progressed, they only lived inside the national park, in the green areas. Well, in fact, all those areas highlighted are national parks. But because of the persecution and the edge effects and the ranchers shooting them, I mean, the first pack I studied, the second pack I studied, the first pack I studied, the alpha male got killed by a car. The second pack, rancher, there were 24 dogs and ranchers shot 20. So, of course, those dogs never lived outside the national park even for a couple of weeks. Well, we managed to convince to work on the ranchers and get the dogs at least to breed in the borders of the national parks. And then eventually we got the dogs living outside the national parks. We got the ranchers to buy in to the fact that the dogs were going to be a part of the scenery. But most of that was not because the ranchers had changed their hearts, but because the public around the ranchers had changed their hearts. And so suddenly the ranchers say, oh, I'm getting rid of these bloody wild dogs. I'm doing the world a favor. Everyone was questioning, saying, no, you're not doing the world a favor. We rather like these animals now. And we managed to now have dogs all over the country. Okay, they're just dispersing dogs, the little yellow dots, but got the population up to about 850, so more than double. And also government made the dogs specially protected. So again, and in fact, that's the only country in the world where we've ever had a prosecution. And so it's because when I started in the early days, I was talking to a group of children, and I put up this slide. And one kid put his hand up, and he'd heard the presentation and said, is that going to be the last puppy? Because in those days, that was it. That was the early days when all I could say, well, this is the map, and these are the problems. And, I can't tell you if that's going to be the last puppy. Well, I was going to share with you a little clip that literally is like 2 weeks old, because I was in the field 2 weeks ago. And this was in a place called Mana Pools. This is a pack of dogs. Pup feeding time. It's 15 pups there, and 15 adults, and not the last puppy, by any shape or form. And years ago, a pack like that would never have been allowed to survive. And today they are, and they're actually becoming a very popular animal. So with that, I'll leave you, and thank you for listening. Yes, one at the back. Okay, how are the children chosen to come to the camps? Well, obviously we raise funds for these bush camps for the children to come, because obviously rural kids can't afford to go. Literally, it's grade 6. That's it. We just take the grade 6. We've got a buy-in from the Ministry of Education that they're allowed a week off school, because as far as they're concerned, this is a valuable enough program for these kids to go for a week. And grade 6, and again, the nice thing is it's a total screening of all the schools in the area. There's no one escapes the net. And actually, in fact, what we didn't realize now was that we've had some of the most heart-wrenching stories from this bush camp, because this bush camp for these kids is something they aspire to from when they get to Form 1 and Form 2, and they've heard about this bush camp. And in fact, I've had so many, the first thing that it does is that it's one of the things that gives confidence of promises. Africa is a place of broken promises. And I remember one kid, we do these little voice pops at the end, just listen, see what the kids have got to say, So what did you find? Oh, I loved hiding in the toilet. Or what did you find? And we get some incredible, you get some, what was the thing you enjoyed the most? And kids are kids, and it's fantastic. And this one kid burst into tears and said, I'm just so happy I got here, because when I went to school in grade 1, I thought it would be closed by the time I got to grade 6. Because but then these kids go there, they get 3 meals a day. It's the first time in their life they've ever had 3 meals a day. They get one-on-one attention. I'm not saying African parents don't give them that. They have a shower. They normally used to buckets, and they have the shower that they just adore. They love a shower, and we can't get them out of there. You give them 15 minutes to shower, and they're in their clothes, and they all come out giggling away, and they're totally wet, and of course in Africa you dry off really quickly. But it's kind of funny, really, and how the West and Africa thinks and how different they are. Because I had again, building partnerships. I had an American, Bruce Lombardo. He'd worked in Florida as a guide. He was teaching in Rhino, and I said, I want you to set the roots of this program up and identify who are my future educators locally going to be and train them, which he did. But he also had maybe many Western and maybe slightly more Western, as in US, ideas about how kids bush camp. And obviously he was thinking more about all the laws and the regulations and this. And we got to the shower block, became a point of interest, because I said, oh, there's a shower block. I was at boarding. I said, right, we can have 12 shower heads, one for each kid, and they can all. And he's like, you can't have that. They can't be. No. He said they've got to have shower curtains, and they've got to have a special area where they can go, and if they're a bit shy, they can take their clothes off so no one sees them. And I'm like, well, some battles are worth fighting. I said, well, no one actually at that point knew how African kids were going to respond anyway, so he could have been right. So, of course, we set this whole thing up, great expense, loads of shower heads everywhere. And then we found that what really happens, the kids come in, they throw the shower curtains up, because what's this flipping thing? And they all go under the shower head, and then they all go to the center. And they all have a big, bathing party in the center. This is cool. And you know what? And I'm thinking, you know what? If when I do it again, I'm going to put one shower head, and that's it, for the whole class, You're just going to have one big rose, and they're going to love it even more. And so it's just a blanket screening, but its impact is huge. They get their 3 meals a day for the first time. They have a shower. We have stairs. They've never been upstairs before. They get taken out to see animals, and it's all about adaptations. The dog is just the top of the pinnacle and predators, but it's all about adaptations and how trees fit in, and ecosystems and adaptations is the theme. Yes, and then there. Can we talk about how we've managed to get buy-in from the government? Okay, well, the one thing that's interesting, government gives us no money, right? But then governments, I don't expect that. But we do get it, like when I need to move a pack of dogs, I can get a minister's signature in 2 days. If I need to make an emergency decision where we had a pack where all the adults were killed by lions, and we decided were we going to take the pups and at least let them survive and then use them as release material for genetic reinforcement. And interestingly, it is linked to the work we do with communities. And ultimately, it's amazing. Let's face it, even governments in Africa, we all know why do politicians kiss babies, because they think they'll get extra votes, even if they don't like kissing babies, or whatever. They do half the things because they think that's going to get them votes. And even in Africa, if the general swell is pro something, even in dictatorial countries, they listen. But we have actually had ministers' children come through. From from a school, we've had the international school come through, where some of the ministers' children go to the best schools. They've come through to our school. But also there is something called what I call the social mycelium. Obviously, it's a bit like Facebook, but if I were to take my staff locally, our local community, if you could draw a line between them and where they're connected in Zimbabwe, you don't realize it, it's huge. You don't think of it that way. And they've bought in because they see that something positive is coming out of it. You know, that kids are getting educated. We have an HIV program that someone else sponsors, but that's seen as a benefit. You know, because painted dog conservation's in the area, the community benefits. And it's been no more than that. It's been simply, and in fact, it must be the only country in the world where painted dogs came up in Parliament as a parliamentary question because we were having trafficking and people were digging dogs out of den and organized from South Africa. And they were like, what's being done about it? Dogs are being dug out of dens and trafficked out the country as a parliamentary question. So yeah, the word's out. But it's also constant reinforcement of the message. There was a question here, yes.
On your last map, you had two specific areas that were unsafe for things.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in those two areas that are so unsafe?
Well, they were unsafe. They were unsafe because of ranchers were shooting them. The ranchers... No, this is outside. The areas unsafe were yeah, back. That one there, yes. These areas here you're talking to. Yeah, basically, because dog territories are so large, yeah, because of what we call edge effect, these dogs were equally going outside the park because, you know, animals walk across borders. And that's actually something we're doing a lot now and raising money for a lot of them, you know, with new technologies, these satellite collars, where we can really see where the dogs are going. And most of them, of course, they're all floating in and out the parks. And so therefore, the packs that live near the boundary of the park are unsafe, in unsafe areas. And also the thing with dogs is that because every dog in a pack has a job, and there's 6 is the minimum pack size, and, you know, 1 gets hit by a car, now it's 5, and then the wheels start to fall off. And so you can really easily destroy a pack very quickly by just, you know, a couple of dogs get killed, particularly the alphas. If an alpha male or an alpha female gets killed, you know, the wheels fall off the pack because they've lost the experience, they've lost the good dogs. And that's why those dogs are chosen. They're chosen because they're good. They're not just because you're a male and you're a female. Yes, and then there. Breathe. Oh, it's a great system. It's basically what it is when they're born, you know, so you maybe get 5 or 6 males and 5 or 6 females, and as pups they're developing these relationships, and they've already identified who is their alpha female. And then when those sisters leave, only one female is the chosen alpha, and the same with the males. And then and interestingly, well, what happens then is that a male group meets a female group, all male group meets a female. And the alpha female, if she likes them, she bonds. If she doesn't, it's like on your bike. But interestingly, but once she's found the one she wants, she bonds for life. Yeah, then you get just what we call a dispersing group. So 4 or 5 males go and meet 4 or 5 females from somewhere else. And in fact, and then what happens is, once they bonded, only one female cycles. There seems to be an estrous suppression going on. But then you see in biology, we just call it kin selection, because ultimately she's just the other ones, they're her sister. So they're aunties. You know, do they mind looking after their sister's pups? No, they don't. The same with the alpha male. Well, it's so what if it's Jack, my brother, whatever, is the alpha. It doesn't matter. I'm helping raise his kids. So, and they all work on that level. But then what happens is because it's such a selective process, the female's very choosy. And if she doesn't like, if the alpha male gets killed, it's not any old male in the pack ain't going to do. Then the pack normally fissions along single-sex lines. But that one female then carries all the pups. So the number of pups born is related to the number of dogs in the pack. So in other words, if she's in a big pack, she has lots of puppies because she's better fed. And if she's in a small pack, she has a few puppies because she's not so well fed. And so I did have one in one pack I called the alpha female neck. I also had a nickname for her, a super bitch, because she had 19 pups one year and 17 the next. But the thing is the painted dogs were quite sure the milk is like seal's milk. It's not domestic dog milk in fat content, very rich, because these pups grow like mushrooms. But they only suckle for a couple of weeks. And when 2 weeks is up, they start getting introduced to regurgitated food. And then by 3 weeks, 4 weeks, Mum's done her job. Here we are. That's why I say it's so good. It's like everybody else, you look after the kids, and I'm going to manage. You know, she then just keeps her watchful eye that makes sure that everyone does what they're supposed to be doing. And it's a system that works very well, because if every female had pups, it'd be a waste of energy. You know, all these pups that were, 40 pups that you can't feed and 35. In that litter of 19 that she had, by the 11 months, she still had 18. But then a car came along and smashed 4. I was absolutely, I'm like, there we are, and there's that almost highlighted the nature versus human balance, what they can pull off and what. So that kind of clarifies. There was a question over there, yes. Right, well, what roles zoos have played? Well, when I first went to zoos 24 years ago, I always remember, it was almost like the dog enclosure was something like this. This was what was on the enclosure. There's a dog and there's a map that's about this big, and yeah. Well, so the first thing that all zoos can do, if they've got dogs in the enclosure, is to display them properly, is to keep people informed, because that also is very important. It's a two-way thing. If I've got an informed public that cares and also understands about what's going on in the wild, people do realize, want to realize that the zoos are exhibiting something and part of a bigger issue. And that is also the message zoos can play when on a public level. Have a good exhibit that shows the link between what's going on in the wild, and there are zoos that do that admirably for species, and I greatly appreciate that. Ones where you go into wherever the viewing area is, and there's this is what's going on in the wild, this is how they're being saved in the wild, this is where funds go, and if you'd like to help, this is where you can help. But the other one, and yes, obviously funds do help, but there's also expertise. Like when we built our facility, zoos helped with that facility in terms of knowledge, in terms of expertise, in terms of us managing our rehab facility. I'm very keen that when we have partnerships with zoos, European Zoo Association, all the zoos just collectively just contribute, because they say, well, we'd rather support one dog program and really help it fly, rather than kind of put a little bit there and a little bit there and a little bit there. But like the European Zoo Initiative, we're working on genetics together. We're trying to obviously help zoos with information. But zoos can help us. They can help us with what they've done with captive animals, with anesthesias. I'm off to Disney shortly because they've been working on some different different anesthesias on captive dogs, which I find could be very valuable for the wild. And then also we've had actual exchanges, which has been very powerful stuff. Houston Zoo have had 3 of our staff already. And it's been amazing for our staff, and the feedback from the zoo was that it was amazing for the zoo staff to share with what's going on in the wild. Our guys, our staff, in fact, we've got a lady just gone out, so not our guys, and not all guys. Our staff have benefited. They've gone out, they've been ambassadors for the dogs, they've been ambassadors for pain dog conservation, They've come back, though, motivated, and they've shared with everybody what they're doing. And of course, just that sharing makes kids and other people look up and go, wow, there's something in this conservation. It's not just, oh, it's a word. You know, there is a bigger, and it also opens up the fact that they realize that there's other people than just Greg and that care about the dogs. So it's a combination of knowledge transfer, which is very important. I mean, and also the thing is, I mean, for example, you know, every zoo's got graphics departments that are amazing. You know, they could help us transmit our message, get it out there. You know, I mean, I laugh when I look at some of my early flyers and I think, oh, God, did I produce that? You know, you could probably hang it in a restroom somewhere, but, you know, but it kind of did its job there and then, but I mean, but so there are a number of ways, and zoos can help raise serious funds. We can't eat bread and water. But the one thing that is nice, though, is that $1 in Africa probably goes 10 times further than $1 here. And we can do a lot. I mean, that kid's bush camp, I mean, I think we work it out that it's probably, my accountant will probably kill me, but I think it's about $30, $35 for the kid for the whole week. You know, and that's all their food and their transport and showers. Yeah, somebody in the front said, yeah, all their water. They're in and out, in and out. But it's money, you know, it goes a long way. So there are, and I also, I always encourage, I love it when any organization, the European zoos, you know, as an example, you know, they said collectively we're going to take you on board as a project to help you. But we're not all going to be putting in tens and 20,000. We'll all just throw into the painted dog pot. But what it is they said, but after a couple of years, they said, and we're going to promise we're going to keep continuity on this. So at least then we always knew we had, you know, $20,000 was there, and it was going to come in, and it wasn't like, oh, it's here today and it's gone tomorrow. You know, we would always rather have someone say, this is the level of commitment. We might be able to do a little bit more, but this is the level of commitment that we're going to promise you for 5 years. Because otherwise you can't plan a good conservation. You can't plan anything. Can any of us plan if you think that tomorrow you're out the door? Any other questions? Yes. We haven't tied in. We have an eco-volunteer project, which isn't anything like the standard Earthwatch project. It's literally, our eco is people just come and they'll join for 3 weeks and they'll sit in the back of the truck as one and whatever anyone does. It's not like a kind of, we're going to have 20 of you and you're all going to go around and do the same thing. We've thought about it. It's you know, so we do have people come and visit, and that's fine. And in fact, you know, when some of the zoo staff have come out, hey, apart from the fact their suitcases are just crammed full of useful stuff that we can, you know, they've often done a little bit of a fundraiser before they come and said, well, we had a little dinner or we had a little brown bag a day at the zoo and we raised a bit of money to cover. And it depends. So it all, we do have it, but it's not core business by any means. Yes? The average lifespan of a painted dog. Well, most of them, unfortunately, due to humans, never even reach their natural lifespan. But the oldest dog ever in the wild was recorded by me. And it was a dog that I studied in Hwange the first time. When I first encountered him, he was 3 years old, at least 3 because he was alpha male. And he was living in farmland. He was living in an area where there were bullets going at him, and there were snares, and there was loads of domestic dogs, so there should have been diseases, but whatever. He was a survivor, and lived in the farmland, and the farmers were going to shoot him, and trying to shoot him, but he was pretty canny. It was like those last wolves you read about, you know, where the hunters were out for weeks and days and years trying to get the last one. But he also, he always had his pack with him. And I made the ranchers sign an agreement that they would not shoot for 3 years, and they'd give me 3 years to, after 3 years, the onus was on me. I said, I'll translocate him. So 3 years he led a life of Riley. I translocated him right to the north of the country. He escaped on the first day, and he came back 500 miles, back to where we'd moved him from. He then built up his pack again, and when I last saw him, he was at least 12 years old. And he was still alpha male. Because even though he was old now, he was still, everyone was like, well, he knows what he's leading. This is what you do, that's what you... So at least 12 years old is the oldest that we've known of. Yeah, no, sorry, I thought it was a question over there. Any more? Yes. Interesting or the most surprising? I think probably it's a balance between how they communicate, because quite often they don't make a lot of noise and they're working like a football team with blindfolds on when they're hunting, and how are you communicating? There's no sound, no. But I think the thing that really captured me the most was the social system and the way the system is so perfect at caring. No conflict. To me, or ultimately, one single word is that they never, ever fight. And this is a pack animal, and there's not a species alive that doesn't fight. And they really don't. They share everything down to a dime. If there's 20 kilos of meat and there's 10 of them, each one gets 2. And the only way, and I think we could learn a lot from them, and the only way I can see they do it in my thesis, I just thought about, because every species has conflict resolution. You have a fight and then you kiss and make up in theory. But what the dogs do is they reinforce the bonds so strongly all day and every day at every single opportunity. It's like preemptive conflict resolution. They're just so damn nice to each other all the time. So when one of them does screw up, as we always do, no one's perfect. Everyone just says, oh, well, that's okay, Greg, you messed up. But so they wake up in the morning, they greet. They finish a hunt, they greet. They sleep in a heap. They have these sleep heaps where you'll have 15 dogs lying in this mountain of dogs. They're not happy unless they're all touching and communicating. And so I think that is probably one of the most amazing. And the other one is just how much they're thinkers, how they can adapt to a situation. And when you think about it, you think that took thought, that took serious working out what was the best route of dealing with this problem. Yeah, and if one dog's injured, recently I splintered a dog up in the wild, his leg was broken, and we put a splint on him and sent him back to his pack. And as soon as the splint was on him, the dog was given babysitting duty. So they immediately will switch them around, what job you do according to what you're good at. And they can have dogs in the pack that are kind of goofy. They're not really seemingly good for nothing. So they find a role for every member of the pack. And so, the goofy dog will be a babysitter, but hey, he can always carry food back to the pup. So he's still got a job. He's doing something useful. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're pretty good. All right.